It was late November, right around 11:30 p.m., when I found myself driving through the winding roads of rural Virginia. I had taken a wrong turn earlier in the evening, and my GPS was of no help, insisting that I was on a road that didn't exist. It was raining hard, and my windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the downpour. I was frustrated, exhausted, and completely alone. I'd been on the road for hours, headed to a small family cabin deep in the woods of Hollow Creek, a place my parents had owned for years but rarely visited anymore. They said it was too isolated, and that they preferred more civilized vacations. To me, it sounded like the perfect place to disconnect for the weekend and escape the constant noise of life. I just hadn't expected the journey to be so difficult. As I inched my way down the narrow dirt road that supposedly led to the cabin, I couldn't shake the growing feeling of unease. The trees lining the road were dense, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands, and the fog was so thick it seemed to swallow my headlights. Every shadow looked like something, or someone, watching me from the darkness. By the time I reached the cabin, it was almost midnight. I parked the car and stepped out into the cold, wet night. The cabin was exactly as I remembered it from my childhood. Small, 2 stories, and surrounded by towering pines. The wooden structure looked older, more worn than I recalled, but it still had that rustic charm I'd always loved. I grabbed my bags and quickly made my way inside, eager to get out of the rain. The interior was musty, the air thick with the scent of old wood and dampness. I fumbled for the light switch near the door, but nothing happened when I flipped it. Great, I thought. The power's out. Typical for a place this remote. Thankfully, I had packed a flashlight and some candles, so I wasn't completely in the dark. I set my bags down in the living room and lit a candle on the mantel. The soft glow cast long shadows across the room, flickering as the flame danced. I suddenly realized just how silent the place was. No hum of electricity, no distant sounds of cars or people, just the wind howling outside and the creaking of the old cabin settling in the cold. I tried to shake off the uneasiness as I unpacked, telling myself it was just my imagination. After all, I hadn't been to the cabin in years. Maybe I was just unused to the isolation. But as I moved through the house, checking the rooms and familiarizing myself with the layout again, that creeping sense of dread only intensified. It started small, things that could be easily dismissed. The feeling of being watched when I was in the kitchen making myself a late-night snack, or the soft sound of footsteps upstairs when I knew I was the only one here. At first, I chalked it up to the wind, the old house settling, or my own tired mind playing tricks on me. But then there was the tapping. I was sitting in the living room, scrolling through my phone under the dim light of the candle, when I heard it. A faint tapping sound coming from upstairs. It was rhythmic, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, holding my breath as I listened, hoping it was just a branch hitting the window or something harmless. But as I strained to hear, the tapping grew louder, closer, until it seemed to be coming from just above my head. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The candle flickered again, casting shifting shadows that made the room seem to breathe. I told myself it was nothing, that I was just tired, but deep down I knew something was wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the stairs. The old wooden steps creaked beneath my weight as I made my way up, each step sounding louder than the last in the deafening silence. I reached the top of the stairs and shone the flashlight down the hallway. There were only 2 rooms upstairs, my parents' old bedroom and the guest room, where I planned to sleep. The tapping had stopped. I cautiously walked down the hallway, stopping at the door to my parents' room. I hadn't been there in years, but I could remember it perfectly. How my mom used to read in the armchair by the window. How my dad's old flannel jacket was always hanging on the back of the door. I reached for the handle, hesitated, then slowly pushed the door open. The room was just as I remembered it, except for one thing. The window was wide open, and the rain was pouring in, soaking the wooden floor. I rushed over to close it, cursing myself for not checking it earlier. But as I reached for the window, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, in the corner of the room, barely visible in the weak beam of my flashlight, was a figure. A person. They were standing perfectly still, their back turned to me. I froze, my hand halfway to the window, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. How could someone be in the house? I had locked the doors behind me, and there was no signs of forced entry. For a moment, neither of us moved. The figure remained motionless, their heads slightly bowed as if they were staring at something on the floor. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, and my breath came in short, panicked gasps. Then, slowly, the figure began to turn. I didn't wait to see their face. I bolted from the room, my feet barely touching the stairs as I raced down to the front door. I fumbled with the lock, my hands shaking so badly that I nearly dropped my keys. Finally, I got the door open and sprinted outside into the pouring rain. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. I threw my bags in the back seat and jumped in, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My heart was still racing, and my mind was a blur of terror and confusion. Who or what had been in that room? How had they gotten in? And more importantly, why hadn't they moved until I saw them? I started the car and sped down the dirt road, barely able to see through the sheets of rain. I didn't care. I just needed to get as far away from that cabin as possible. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the figure standing in the middle of the road, watching me leave. But there was nothing, just darkness. I didn't stop driving until I reached the nearest town, a small, sleepy place called Ridgewood, about an hour away from the cabin. I pulled into the parking lot of a gas station and sat there for a while, trying to calm down. My phone had no signal, and I was too scared to go back on that road, even to call for help. I spent the rest of the night in my car, locked with the engine running. The next morning, I drove straight home and never looked back. I've told a few people about what happened at Hollows Creek, but most just laugh it off or say I was overtired. But I know what I saw, and I know that cabin is haunted or something dark and malevolent. My parents sold the property a few months later, saying it was too much of a hassle to maintain. They have no idea what really lives there, and I hope to God they never find out.